Hi, I'm Jennifer, and welcome to the Haunted Hour. House parties are supposed to be full of music, laughter, and good memories. But sometimes they invite something else in. Tonight, I'll take you through terrifying house party horror stories. Doors that locked on their own. Faces no one could recognize. And guests who were never really alive. What was meant to be a night of fun turned into a night of pure terror. Let's begin and remember, not every guest leaves when the party's over. Story 1, Part 1. I wasn't even supposed to be at the party that night. My best friend had dragged me along, promising it would be low-key, just a few people and good music. The house was at the edge of the city, half buried in trees, looking abandoned from the outside. It had that kind of worn-down charm you only see in horror movies. The paint peeling, the windows black like empty eye sockets. Inside, though, it was buzzing with life, flashing lights, laughter, and the bass from speakers so loud they rattled the floorboards. I stuck close to the wall, feeling already out of place, until someone handed me a drink. I took it without thinking, just to look less awkward. The cup was cold and smelled sweet, masking whatever was really inside. I took a few sips, bitter after the first taste, and tried to ignore the nagging voice in my head telling me something was off. That's when the walls started breathing. At first, I thought it was just the heat and bodies packed into the small rooms. The wallpaper rippled like a living thing, and the chandeliers above swayed despite there being no breeze. My vision blurred at the edges, lights bending and twisting into strange, impossible shapes. I pressed my back against the wall, trying to steady myself, but it was like the house itself was tilting, slipping me deeper into its gut. Laughter around me slowed down, voices dragging into low, demonic growls. Every face I turned to looked wrong, their eyes too large, mouth stretching wider than humanly possible. Someone bumped into me and their skin was cold, wet, like a fish. I staggered into the kitchen, desperate for water, but the sink spewed out thick black sludge. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I tried to find my friend, but everyone I passed seemed like strangers now. Their heads lolled at odd angles, jaws snapping open and shut like broken dolls. The hallways stretched longer with each step, doors multiplying along the walls, each one slightly open and whispering my name. Come in, they sang, a chorus of dry, cracked voices. I cover my ears, but the sound burrowed into my skull. Panic rising, I stumbled into a side room and slammed the door behind me. But when I turned around, it wasn't a room, it was a void. Endless blackness stretched out before me, dotted with thousands of tiny, blinking red lights like eyes. Something huge shifted in the dark, and I could feel its attention snap toward me. I tore back into the hall, slamming the door shut, so hard the whole house seemed to shudder. People watched me as I ran, but they didn't move to help. They just smiled, lazy and monstrous, their teeth stretching into needle points. I realized with growing horror that I wasn't hallucinating anymore. This was real, or real enough to trap me here. I tried to find the front door, but the layout kept changing. I'd see the door one moment, shining in the distance like salvation, only to round a corner and find it gone. Every wall now seemed to breathe, the wallpaper peeling back to reveal weeping, blinking eyes underneath. I sprinted blindly, the floor feeling sticky and soft under my shoes. In the main living room, the crowd parted for me without a word. Standing on the center table was a woman in a blood-red dress, her head jerking in small, puppet-like movements. "You drank it," she said, voice layered with thousands of echoes. You agreed. I screamed at them, told them I never agreed to anything, but they only laughed. The woman jumped down from the table, her movements twisted and broken, bones cracking audibly with every step. Her face flickered, showing different faces every second. Young, old, male, female, decaying. She was everything and nothing all at once. I tried to back away, but hands gripped my shoulders from behind, long fingers digging into my skin. They dragged me to the center of the room, while everyone clapped in a slow, mocking rhythm. I kicked and screamed, but my body felt heavy, drugged, barely my own anymore. They circled me, chanting low and rhythmic, the words so ancient they made my teeth ache. The house around us seemed to pulse faster, the air thickening into something almost solid. Above, the ceiling split open like rotten wood, revealing a massive, endless darkness that hummed with hunger. They lifted me up toward it, their fingers cold and slimy, and I felt the darkness reach down in return. Just before it touched me, I had blacked out, a scream frozen on my lips. When I woke up, I was alone in the same house, but it was completely silent now. No music, no people, just an oppressive stillness that made the hair on my arms stand straight up. The walls were stained and cracked, the floor littered with broken furniture and dried blood. Moonlight filtered through filthy windows, and outside, I could hear the faint sound of whispering. Thousands of voices calling my name. My mouth was dry, my limbs weak, but I forced myself up. Every shadow seemed alive, reaching for me just out of the corner of my eye. I had to get out. I had to find the door, whatever it cost. I staggered down the hall. The doors all slammed shut now, the whispers growing louder with every step. My reflection in the mirror didn't match my movements, grinning when I wasn't, tilting its head mockingly. I punched it out of panic, the glass cutting deep into my knuckles. But even the blood felt wrong. Thick, black, sluggish. I finally found the front door and yanked it open. But instead of the street, there was only an endless corridor lined with partygoers, their faces pale and blank. They clapped as I stepped into the hall. A slow, dead applause that echoed into forever. I wanted to cry, but my tear ducts felt burned out. I turned back toward the house, but was gone, swallowed up by the darkness. Trapped between two nightmares, I ran forward, the figures on either side grabbing at me with cold, skeletal hands. I dodged and weaved, heart hammering in my ears, but the hall just stretched and stretched, growing narrower until I had to squeeze through. The walls pressed in against me, scraping my skin raw, whispering in voices that sounded like my own, distorted and mocking. "You shouldn't have drunk it," they hissed. "You belong here now." I fell to my knees, sobbing, the hallway tightening around me like a coffin. At the very end of the corridor, a door stood alone, its surface rotting and oozing dark fluid. It was my only choice. I crawled toward it, every movement a fight against the suffocating walls. As I touched the handle, I felt something sharp sink into my leg, claws gripping hard. I yanked the door open and fell through into another room, gasping for air. This time, I was back at the party, but everything was frozen. People mid-laugh, mid-dance, stuck like mannequins. The woman in the red dress stood in the center, staring straight at me, her eyes bleeding black tears. "You made it," she said, her voice ringing hollow. "But you can never leave." I turned to run, but the floor split open beneath me, revealing a churning pit of arms and faces, reaching upward. They grabbed at my ankles, pulling me down, their mouths opening in silent screams. I thrashed and fought, but the more I struggled, the deeper I sank. Above me, the woman watched with that broken, twitching smile. As the darkness swallowed me whole, I realized something cold and horrifying. The drink hadn't just spiked my body, it had spiked my soul. Story 1 Part 2. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but when I opened my eyes, I was no longer falling. I was lying on a cold, wet floor, the smell of mildew and rust choking the air around me. It was completely dark, except for a flickering light bulb swinging wildly overhead. My head pounded with a rhythm that felt almost like someone, or something, knocking on the inside of my skull. As I sat up, my fingers brushed against something slick and writhing on the ground. I recoiled, heart hammering, as low whispers started up around me again. They came from the walls, the ceiling, even from the floor beneath my feet. "You drank the promise," they said. "Now you must pay the toll." My stomach twisted in terror as I realized I wasn't alone. I staggered to my feet, each movement feeling heavier than the last, as though invisible chains weighed down my limbs. As my eyes adjusted, I realized I was in a long, underground tunnel made of crumbling stone and rotted wood. Strange symbols were carved into the walls, pulsating faintly, with a sickly green glow. I pressed forward, my footsteps echoing hollowly in the oppressive silence. Every so often, the ground beneath me would shift slightly, like something massive was moving just under the surface. At the end of the tunnel, a heavy iron door loomed, half open, leaking a deep red light into the darkness. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, almost pleading, against every instinct screaming at me to run the other way. I pushed through. The next room was larger, but somehow worse. The air was thick, oily, and buzzing with unseen insects. Massive tables lined the walls, and strapped to them were dozens of bodies, party guests. Their faces were frozen in expressions of horror, their mouths sewn shut with coarse black thread. Tubes ran from their chests into massive vats filled with bubbling red liquid. The drink, I staggered backward, bile rising in my throat as I realized the truth. They had harvested their souls, liquefying their essence into that cursed drink. A low, gurgling laugh rumbled from the far end of the room, and I saw a shadow detach itself from the darkness. It was the woman in the red dress, but her body was stitched together from hundreds of other people. "You wanted a taste of forever," she croaked, her many mouths speaking as one. "Now you are part of the harvest." I turned and ran, slipping and stumbling through the blood-slick floor. The walls groaned and bent inward as I passed, like the house itself was trying to stop me. Behind me, the stitched woman began to chase, her limbs jerking and snapping at unnatural angles. Every step she took echoed like a hammer against bone. I could feel the heat of her breath, rancid and thick, brushing the back of my neck. I crashed through another door, slamming it shut just in time to hear her shriek in frustration. But I knew it wouldn't stop her for long. The room I had stumbled into was a library, but the books were wrong. Their covers were stitched human skin, the pages written in blood that never dried. Every book had a name on the spine, and some of those names were people I recognized from the party. I found a mirror in the corner and almost screamed when I saw my reflection. My eyes were black pits, and my skin looked stretched too tightly over my bones. Whatever was happening to the others was already happening to me. Desperation clawed at my throat. I had to escape before I was completely hollowed out and turned into another ingredient. Suddenly, the mirror rippled and a face pushed through. A twisted version of myself. It grinned at me, its teeth long and sharp. "You can't leave," it hissed. "You're already one of us." I swung a nearby chair at the mirror, shattering it into 1,000 bleeding shards. The lights in the library flickered violently, books screaming as they fell from the shelves. Somewhere above, I could hear the stitched woman laughing, her voice growing closer, more excited. The house had no intention of letting me leave. I kicked open a door and sprinted up a spiraling staircase that felt like it would never end. At the top of the stairs, I found myself in a grand dining room. The table was set for a feast, plates filled with raw, rotting meat, and goblets overflowing with that cursed red drink. At the head of the table sat a figure in a long, black robe, its face hidden under a heavy hood. As I stepped closer, the figure raised its head, revealing a face stitched together from dozens of different people. The previous guests merged into one. It spoke without moving its mouth, a voice that vibrated inside my own skull. "Drink," it commanded, "or be devoured." Behind me, I heard the door slam shut and lock. Tears blurred my vision. I could either drink and lose what little soul I had left, or resist and be torn apart. The robed figure extended a goblet toward me, the liquid inside swirling like a living thing. My hands shook violently as I took it. For a moment, the entire room held its breath. Then, at the last possible second, I threw the drink into the figure's face and bolted for the far wall, where a window gleamed like an exit. I smashed through it, shards cutting deep into my flesh, but I didn't care. I hit the ground hard, bones jarring painfully, and scrambled to my feet. The house behind me roared like a wounded animal, its walls buckling inward, its roof splitting apart. I sprinted into the dense woods surrounding it, the air thick with the coppery smell of blood. I didn't dare look back, but I could hear the stitched woman screaming my name. Her voice carried on the wind. Branches clawed at my skin, unseen hands tugging at my clothes. My legs burned, lungs heaving, but I kept running until the forest gave way to a deserted road. A single, battered pickup truck sat idling there, door open. Without thinking, I dove into it and slammed the door shut. The engine rumbled to life, and the truck took off on its own, driverless. I didn't care. I just wanted to be as far away from that house as possible. As the road twisted and turned, I dared to glance into the rearview mirror, and my heart stopped. In the bed of the truck, hunched and smiling, was the woman in the red dress, her stitched skin glistening in the moonlight. Her mouth opened wider and wider, until it split her head in two. "You can't escape forever," she whispered, her voice leaking into my ears like thick, black tar. The world blurred around me, and darkness closed in once again. But just before I blacked out, I saw it. The house wasn't just a place. It was alive, and it had already planted its seed inside me. No matter where I ran, no matter how far I fled, I would never be free. My soul was marked, branded, claimed. I was just another part of its endless, growing collection. As my consciousness slipped away, I heard the house call out to me once more, a hungry, endless whisper. The nightmare has only just begun. Story 2. I didn't even want to go to the party that night. It was one of those last-minute invites, The kind where you barely know the host but feel bad saying no. The house was at the edge of town, way past where the streetlights ended, sitting isolated at the end of a cracked, weed-choked driveway. As my car bumped along the road, I felt this strange pressure in my chest, like something warning me to turn back. When I pulled up, there were already a dozen cars parked haphazardly around the house. Music thudding so deep it made the ground pulse under my feet. The house looked wrong somehow. Too tall, the windows too small and high, the angles just a little crooked, like it was designed by someone who didn't understand human spaces. But the front door was open, lights spilling out into the dark, and laughter echoed from within. So, against my better judgment, I went inside. The air was thick with the smell of cheap beer, sweat, and something else, something metallic, like blood. I weaved through groups of strangers, each face looking weirdly blurry under the dim, flickering lights. It felt like the walls themselves were watching me, leaning in closer every time I turned my head. I spotted a few people I sort of knew and forced a smile, grabbing a red cup from a cluttered table without even checking what was inside. The music was too loud, a distorted mess of sounds that didn't feel like any real song. People were dancing, but not with any rhythm, more like jerky, puppet-like movements, arms flailing a half second too late, legs bending wrong. I tried to shake off the growing unease, telling myself I was just tired, but my skin prickled like static. I decided I needed fresh air and made for the back patio. That's when I realized the layout of the house didn't make sense. I'd walked straight through the living room, through a hallway, into another hallway, and somehow ended up back at the kitchen. I hadn't turned. I hadn't changed direction. I went straight and ended up somewhere completely different. A group of partygoers watched me, their heads tilting almost in unison, slow and unnatural. One of them, a girl with stringy blonde hair and wide, unblinking eyes, grinned at me too wide. "You're not supposed to leave," she said in a voice that sounded like someone speaking through a broken radio. My heart stuttered. I mumbled something about the bathroom and darted down another hall, determined to find the door and get out. The halls were wrong too. They stretched longer than they should have, the floorboards groaning under my steps like they were alive. Paintings lined the walls, ugly, disturbing things, faces twisted in agony, hands reaching out of black voids, eyes that seemed to follow me no matter where I went. I passed a mirror and caught my reflection and froze. It wasn't moving with me. I lifted my hand, but my reflection stayed still, staring back with hollow, dark pits for eyes. I stumbled back in terror, slamming into something cold and solid. Turning around, I saw a man standing there, too tall, with arms that dangled almost to his knees. His mouth hung open, but no sound came out. I bolted, heart hammering, not caring where I ran, only that I had to move. I found a staircase and sprinted up it 2 steps at a time. The second floor was worse. The walls here dripped with some kind of thick black fluid that smelled like rotten meat. The lights buzzed and popped, casting the hall into sudden, jerky flashes of dark and light. Doors lined the hall, all of them closed except one at the very end. From inside came the faint sound of chanting, low and guttural, like something ancient. I didn't want to go near it, but something compelled me forward. The closer I got, the colder the air became, freezing my breath into mist. I reached the door, hand trembling, and nudged it open with my foot. Inside, a group of people in filthy clothes stood around a figure on the floor, slicing into it with rusty knives. The figure turned its head weakly towards me, and I saw my own face staring back. I staggered away, bile rising in my throat, and the group turned to look at me, knives glinting in the flickering light. Their faces were wrong, distorted like clay half melted and pulled apart. One of them hissed, a sound like steam escaping a kettle. I slammed the door shut and ran, hearing the wet slap of their feet behind me. I didn't care where I went anymore. I just needed to get away. But every door I opened led back into the same bloody room, the same scene playing over and over. My mind fractured a little more each time, and soon I didn't know if I was still running or if I was already lying there on the floor, being carved open. Finally, I burst into the backyard, or what should have been the backyard. Instead, it was a vast, empty field under a black, starless sky. No fence, no neighbors, just emptiness. Figures stood in the distance, tall and thin, silhouetted against nothingness. They started walking towards me, slow but unstoppable, their heads tilting unnaturally as they moved. The air was filled with whispering, 1,000 voices speaking just below hearing. I backed away, heart jackhammering, but there was nowhere to go. The house was gone, vanished like it had never existed. The ground beneath my feet cracked and groaned like something was waking up beneath the surface. I turned to run, but the ground gave way beneath me, plunging me into darkness. I fell forever, it seemed, screaming until my voice gave out. When I finally hit the bottom, it wasn't solid, it was soft like flesh. The walls around me pulsed with a sick, reddish glow, like I had fallen inside some vast, living thing. I scrambled to my feet, slipping on the wet, vein of floor, and ran blindly. Shapes moved in the distance, huge and lumbering, whispering my name. I realized with horror that I wasn't in the real world anymore. If I had ever been, I had crossed over into something else, something hungry. At last, I saw a door standing alone in the middle of the fleshy landscape. A normal wooden door, utterly out of place. Desperation clawed at me, and I sprinted toward it. The door shuddered as I grabbed the handle, and I heard a deep, booming voice from behind me. Once you open it, you belong to us. I didn't care. I ripped the door open and plunged through without looking back. I stumbled out onto a deserted, crumbling street under a sickly orange sky. The air smelled like burning hair and sulfur. Every window of every building around me had faces pressed against the glass, watching, grinning. I walked for what felt like hours, but the streets looped back on themselves, trapping me in an endless maze. At every turn, I caught glimpses of the partygoers, their limbs jerking like marionettes, their blank faces leering at me. I realized they weren't trapped. They were this place. And now, so was I. Somewhere deep within the twisting alleys, I heard the faint thud of that awful music again, and the smell of beer and blood drifted on the wind. I wasn't free. I'd never been free. I just moved from one layer of the nightmare to another. And the party? It was still going. It was always going. And worse, they were waiting for me to dance.